Okay, so it's Cat Stanley Space Demon coming at you again with another video. And today I want to talk about Aerosmith. You know, 1970s Aerosmith, the early Aerosmith, the bad boys from Boston, the dirty hard rock band, not Aerosmith Mark II in the 80s when they got sober and they started churning out top 40 pop hits like Ragdoll and Janie's Got a Gun, and collaborating with professional pop songwriters like Diane Warren on songs like Don't Want to Miss a Thing. Don't want to talk about that band. I want to talk about the original Aerosmith band because recently I came across an interesting article from May of 1976. It's on the website theconcertdatabase.com, and it's a review of a show that Aerosmith did at the Pontiac Silverdome on May 8th, 1976. They played with Foghat and Ted Nugent as their support bands. Silverdome at the time was known as Pontiac Metropolitan Stadium, PonMet for short. And I want to talk about this little review of the concert, which was seen by 76,000 plus fans. It says, PonMet Rock Concert, Let the Buyer Beware, by a guy called David Keeps. I don't know which newspaper this was from, if it was from the Free Press or the News, or an Ann Arbor newspaper, because the only info I could find out about this David Keeps was that he grew up in suburban Detroit and he attended the University of Michigan. Looks like he might have still been a student at the University of Michigan at the time of this article, because I found a contribution he had made to a book about Stooges guitarist Ron Ashton, written by a guy called, I don't know if the guy's called John Wombat, wrote a book about Ron Ashton, and this David Keeps made a contribution about it, so it looked like he was pretty ingrained in the music scene around Detroit at the time. Knew a lot of the local artists, such as, Alice Cooper. He hung around out around Ann Arbor, and he knew a lot about what was going on in the music back then, the glam rock and everything. But the thing I want to talk about, okay, so it says PonMet Rock Concert, Let the Buyer Beware. It says musical mayhem was rampant at PonMet Stadium Saturday night. Yada, yada, yada. Ted Nugent, Foghat, and Aerosmith faced a throng of 80,000 teenage rock maniacs. Now, I want to skip down. Of course, he gives a review of Foghat's set, Ted Nugent, but I want to skip down to the headliner, what he says about Aerosmith. He said they were greeted by an insane and frenzied ovation, which was far from deserved. They are quite possibly the worst group I have ever seen, and probably the most successful. Now listen to what he says. Probably the most successful of the nouveau punk rockers. Now he hyphenates it, punk rockers. He says that Aerosmith were punk rockers. Now this is the first evidence I have ever seen of Aerosmith being referred to as a punk rock band. Now, according to Wikipedia, the term punk rock was previously used by American rock critics in the early 70s to describe the mid-60s garage bands. Detroit acts such as MC5 and Iggy and the Stooges, and of course I had mentioned Ron Ashton, who was in the Stooges, and other bands from elsewhere created out of the mainstream music that became highly influential on what was to come. And then they mentioned the New York Dolls, who were part of the burgeoning punk scene in New York City. Of course, the Sex Pistols wouldn't come to the States until 78. Their first album released in the States in November of 77. The Ramones had just hit the scene. Their first album had just come out at the time of this article. But I've never heard Aerosmith being lumped in with the punk rockers. And I know that probably if you'd asked Aerosmith, they would not call themselves a punk band. But back then, I'm sure they thought they were a dirty blues band. They were a hard rock band. They weren't punks. But again, here's some more about what the guy says. If you move down in the article, he says, and he hyphenates it. He says, punk rock reaches its artistic height when the artists involved have a good sense of the ridiculous, like Jagger. Now, he's lumping the Stones in there. I guess they could have been considered a garage band when they hit the scene, but I still think they were a dirty blues band when they hit the scene. And Johansson, lead singer of the New York Dolls, okay, closer to the punk thing. The trouble with Aerosmith, particularly their vocalist Steven Tyler, is that they take themselves too seriously, which destroys the effectiveness of the musical style and stage performance in the genre of punk rock. Were Aerosmith considered a punk band? Now, I turned 1 year old in 1976, the summer of 76, so I'm going to be honest, I'm going to plead ignorance on this. I'm not old enough to remember what was going on in music back there. Maybe some of my older viewers can corroborate when Aerosmith hit the scene. Were they considered a punk rock band, or is this just one journalist's opinion? This guy seems pretty well informed. I mean, he knew Ron Ashton and the Stooges. So yeah, I found this very curiosity when I saw this and I read this. Aerosmith, punk rockers, never would have considered, just based on my knowledge, my retrospective knowledge of the history of punk rock. Of course, the early days, I think of the Ramones and the Sex Pistols, and earlier before that, the Stooges, MC5, things like that. But I never would have thought Aerosmith would have been a punk rock band, but apparently at least one journalist thought so. And I think maybe this guy, he kind of lumps Aerosmith in with the New York Dolls and the Stones because of the resemblance. Obviously, Aerosmith highly influenced by the Stones, and then the resemblance between Jagger, Steven Tyler, and David Johansson all vaguely resemble each other. Particularly, people look at the big lips. But I think maybe that's where the guy's making a connection. But wow, I found this fascinating when I saw this. I'd never seen any reference to Aerosmith and punk rock in the same sentence. So what do you guys think, particularly my older viewers out there? Do you have any recollection back in the day, Aerosmith, were they considered a punk rock band? Or what, most people think of them as a hard rock, dirty blues band in terms of retrospect. But that's the video today. I'd love to hear what everybody thinks. Do you find this as interesting as I do? Maybe this is a nothing burger. Maybe this is something you couldn't care less about. It's like, who cares? I don't know. Maybe you don't care. Let me know. If you don't care, don't comment. If you care, comment. One way or the other. Love to hear everybody's comments. As always, positive, negative, agree with me, disagree with me. I love to hear it all. Hope you dug it, and we'll see you next time.
Who's here?